Flames engulfed the car, painting the night in terrifying shades of red and orange. The woman police officer was trapped inside, unconscious, her body pinned against the door. People stood frozen, too afraid to approach as the fire grew louder with every crackle. But then, through the smoke, a homeless man charged forward. His clothes were torn, his hair matted with dirt, yet his determination burned brighter than the fire itself. Beside him, his dog barked furiously, pulling at the officer's sleeve through the shattered window. In that instant, he became the only hope for her survival. Just hours earlier, everything seemed ordinary. The city streets glowed under neon lights, and life continued in its usual rhythm. Police officer Maria stepped out of the precinct after her long shift, feeling exhaustion mixed with relief. The night air was cool, carrying the faint hum of traffic and distant sirens. She thought only about heading home, taking a shower, and resting after a day filled with tense interrogations and paperwork. She had no idea that destiny had placed her directly in the path of someone who would change her life forever. Not far from her, sitting against the wall of a rundown cafe, was a homeless man known to locals as David. His clothes were ragged, his shoes nearly falling apart, and his beard carried the dust of countless sleepless nights. Yet his eyes still had a spark, a glimmer of life, and stubborn strength. At his side lay a scruffy brown dog, his only companion. The two of them survived together, sharing scraps of food and the comfort of loyalty that neither words nor wealth could buy. Passers-by rarely noticed David. Most avoided his gaze, pretending he didn't exist. Children sometimes pointed, and parents quickly pulled them away, muttering warnings. But David didn't hate people for their indifference. He had grown used to it. Life had taught him to expect nothing, to live one day at a time. That night, however, something tugged at him, a strange feeling that made him restless. He couldn't shake off the sense that the evening held more than hunger and cold. He felt as though fate itself was calling him to witness something extraordinary. Maria's patrol car was parked on the edge of the block, where the road narrowed between tall buildings. She slipped into the driver's seat, sighing as the leather creaked beneath her. The engine rumbled to life, and the familiar sound gave her a moment of comfort. She leaned back, allowing herself a small smile. Her latest case had been exhausting, a chase after a group of men suspected of smuggling weapons into the city. She didn't know the full truth yet, but deep down she felt the danger wasn't over. Someone out there wanted her silenced. David rose slowly, stretching his sore legs. His dog gave a low bark, as if sensing his unease. He patted the animal's head absent-mindedly. "Come on, buddy. Let's walk," he murmured. They wandered aimlessly through the streets, their silhouettes swallowed by shadows and the glow of streetlights. The rain earlier that evening had left puddles on the ground, reflecting neon signs like broken shards of glass. Every step echoed with loneliness, yet something in David's chest pressed him forward, guiding him without explanation toward the very street where Maria now sat in her patrol car. Inside the car, Maria adjusted her radio, listening to brief chatter from dispatch. The city seemed quiet, almost deceptively peaceful. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been following her for the past few days. Shadows at night, footsteps that vanished when she turned around, all small things she had dismissed as paranoia. Still, her instincts screamed louder now than ever before. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror. The streets looked empty, but she knew better. Sometimes danger lurked in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike. David's stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since morning. He ignored it, focusing instead on the unease that grew stronger with every step. His dog's ears twitched, and he suddenly stopped, sniffing the air. David frowned, following the animal's gaze. Up ahead, parked under a flickering street lamp, he saw a car, the police cruiser. He wouldn't have paid attention if not for the figure inside. Even from a distance, David recognized a woman officer. He had seen her before, always serious, always alert. Tonight, though, she seemed different. There was tension in her every movement. Maria checked her phone, scrolling through messages. There was nothing alarming, yet her nerves refused to calm. She thought about her late father, who had been a police officer before her. "Trust your instincts," he had always told her. She pressed her lips together, reminding herself of those words. Something was wrong, and she could feel it. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed down the street. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. At the same time, David's dog barked sharply, pulling his leash as if confirming that the sound was no accident. Both of them turned toward the noise. A dark van sped past the intersection, its tires screeching. Maria's training kicked in immediately. She reached for her radio, reporting the vehicle and preparing to follow. But before she could start the engine, the van swerved violently, colliding with a parked truck. The impact was brutal, the van rolling onto its side before bursting into flames. Maria gasped, frozen for a split second. Then she saw movement inside. Someone was crawling, trying desperately to get out. Her duty screamed at her to act. Without hesitation, she threw open her door and ran toward the burning wreck. David sprinted forward almost at the same time. He didn't question why his feet moved so fast. All he knew was that someone was in danger, and his heart refused to let him stand by. His dog raced alongside, barking wildly. People from nearby shops and apartments peeked out, gasping at the sight of fire devouring the van. Some shouted warnings, telling him to stop, but David ignored them. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but he reached the wreck in seconds. Through the smoke, he saw Maria pulling desperately at the jammed door. The heat was unbearable. Flames licked at the twisted metal, crackling like a living beast. Maria coughed, covering her face with one arm as she tugged at the handle. Her uniform was already smudged with soot, her eyes watering from the smoke. "Help!" she shouted to no one in particular. David stumbled forward, coughing, and without hesitation joined her. "Move aside!" he growled hoarsely. Maria blinked in shock. She recognized him as the homeless man she had often passed by. For a moment, disbelief flickered in her eyes. Then, seeing his determination, she stepped back and let him try. David braced himself, gripping the metal with both hands. His palms burned, but he pulled with all the strength his weary body had left. The door creaked, then groaned, before finally bending open enough for Maria to reach inside. Together, they grabbed the injured passenger and dragged him out just as flames surged higher. The man coughed violently, barely conscious, but alive. Maria quickly pulled him to safety, while David collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. His dog whined, circling him anxiously. People began gathering at a distance, their shocked faces illuminated by the fire. But it wasn't over. Maria suddenly realized with horror that the driver was still inside. She turned toward the car, panic flooding her veins. The flames had already reached the driver's seat, the smoke turning thicker. "We have to go back," she shouted. David's chest heaved as he raised his head, eyes locking onto hers. His body screamed for rest, but something in her desperate voice pushed him to his feet. Without another word, he staggered back toward the van. Maria tried to stop him, but he shook his head. "If we wait, he'll die," he rasped, disappearing into the smoke. Inside, the heat was suffocating. David covered his face with his sleeve, his vision blurred by smoke. He could barely see the driver, slumped against the steering wheel, unconscious. "Come on," David muttered, pushing through the pain. He grabbed the man's arm, pulling with all his strength. The driver didn't move at first, heavy as dead weight, but David refused to give up. His body trembled, his lungs burned, yet he kept pulling until, with a final desperate effort, he managed to drag the man out through the broken window. Outside, Maria rushed forward, helping him haul the driver away. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouts of relief. Some people clapped, others called emergency services on their phones. Maria knelt beside the unconscious driver, checking his pulse. "He's alive," she announced, her voice trembling. Relief washed over her, but when she looked up, she saw David collapse onto the pavement. His face was pale, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. His dog whimpered, pressing its nose against his arm. Maria's heart clenched. She had seen courage in many forms during her career, but nothing compared to the selflessness of the man lying before her. She pressed her hand to his shoulder. "Stay with me," she urged, her voice firm despite the chaos around them. David groaned softly, opening his eyes just enough to meet hers. In them, she saw pain, exhaustion, but also something deeper, an unshakable will to live. Why would you risk your life like that?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. His cracked lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Because no one else would," he croaked. Those simple words struck Maria harder than anything she had heard in years. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as fire trucks and ambulances approached. Red and blue lights began painting the street. Firefighters rushed forward, battling the blaze with hoses, while paramedics swarmed around the injured men. Maria helped lift the unconscious driver onto a stretcher. She kept glancing back at David, who was now sitting against the curb, his dog curled protectively at his side. He looked fragile, almost broken, yet his presence radiated strength. People whispered, pointing at him with awe. For the first time in a long while, David wasn't invisible. He was a hero. Maria stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by everything that had just unfolded. She had started the night exhausted and doubtful, but now her perspective shifted entirely. She looked at David and realized that beneath the dirt and ragged clothing was a man braver than most officers she had ever worked with. His sacrifice had saved 2 lives tonight. As she approached him, his dog barked once, almost proudly, as if to remind her who had also played a part. She knelt beside David, offering her hand. "You did something incredible," she said softly. He lowered his gaze, embarrassed. The night air was heavy with smoke and sirens, yet in that moment, silence seemed to fall between them. Maria studied the homeless man who had risked everything without hesitation. This isn't the end, she thought to herself. She didn't know yet how, but she felt certain their paths were meant to cross again. Fate had brought them together for a reason, and tonight was only the beginning. As paramedics prepared to take the injured away, Maria stayed by David's side, determined not to let him fade back into the shadows. His story, she realized, was only beginning. David sat in the back of the ambulance, a blanket wrapped around his trembling shoulders. His dog, still damp from the water sprayed by firefighters, rested its head on his lap. Maria stood close, refusing to leave his side. You should go to the hospital, the paramedic urged. But David shook his head stubbornly. Hospitals terrified him. Too many questions, too much attention. He preferred the shadows. Still, his chest ached from smoke inhalation, and Maria could see he was barely holding himself together. She crossed her arms, already determined, this time, he wouldn't disappear. Fine, she said firmly. If you won't go to the hospital, then you're coming with me. David blinked, startled. What? Maria leaned closer, her eyes sharp but filled with compassion. You just saved 2 lives tonight. I'm not letting you crawl back into an alley and collapse. David looked away, embarrassed. He wasn't used to kindness, especially from people in uniform. His dog barked softly, as if agreeing with Maria. For the first time in years, David felt cornered, not by fear, but by someone who actually cared what happened to him. Hours later, Maria guided David into her modest apartment. It was nothing luxurious. A small living room, an old couch, and a kitchen with a perpetually humming fridge. But to David, it felt like a palace. He stood awkwardly near the door, unsure whether to sit or stay standing. His dog trotted in confidently, circling the carpet before lying down. Maria noticed the way David kept glancing around nervously, as if he expected to be thrown out any second. Relax, she said gently. You're safe here, David muttered. I haven't been safe in years. Maria brought him tea, steam rising from the chipped mug. She watched as he wrapped his hands around it, savoring the warmth. Why do you live like this? She asked softly. David hesitated, staring into the dark liquid. I wasn't always on the streets, he whispered. I had a family once, a job, but one mistake, one wrong deal, and everything fell apart. His voice cracked. Maria didn't push. She knew pain when she heard it. Instead, she nodded slowly, offering silence instead of judgment. For David, that silence was the kindest thing anyone had given him in years. The next morning, Maria returned to the precinct. Her colleagues bombarded her with questions about the fire and the dramatic rescue. She mentioned the injured men, but carefully avoided talking about David. Something told her that if her superiors learned too much about him, they might use his past against him. She wanted to protect him, though she couldn't explain why. That same morning, detectives revealed something chilling. The van hadn't crashed by accident. Evidence suggested it had been sabotaged. Maria's stomach tightened. If the crash was deliberate, then someone had wanted those men dead. Meanwhile, David wandered Maria's apartment, restless. He felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't his. Yet he couldn't ignore the warmth he felt when her dog playfully wagged its tail at his own, as if welcoming them. He found an old book on her shelf and traced the worn cover with his fingers. Reading had once been his escape, before life had stolen everything from him. When Maria returned that evening, she found him asleep on the couch, the book still resting on his chest. For a fleeting moment, he looked like the man he used to be. Over the following days, Maria and David settled into an unlikely rhythm. She worked long hours, while he fixed small things in her apartment. A leaky faucet, a broken chair, even a squeaky door hinge. You don't have to, she told him. He only shrugged. I need to do something. Otherwise, I'll lose my mind. His dog followed him faithfully, while Maria's quiet admiration grew. Beneath the layers of hardship, she saw a man of resilience, a man who had been broken but not destroyed. What she didn't know was that his past was about to catch up to him. One evening, as Maria walked home, A black car slowed near her. A tinted window rolled down, and a voice hissed, "Stop asking questions about the van, officer, or you'll regret it." The car sped off before she could react. Maria's pulse quickened. Someone was watching her, someone powerful. That night, she confided in David. He listened carefully, his brow furrowed. "I've seen that kind of car before," he muttered. Maria raised an eyebrow. "Where?" David looked away. "Back when I still had a life. Those men, they're dangerous, and if they're after you, you need to be careful." Maria studied him closely. "How do you know them?" she asked. David sighed heavily. "Because once I worked for people like that. I didn't know at first, but by the time I realized, it was too late. They used me, and when I refused to play along, they destroyed me." His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Maria's heart tightened. The man sitting in front of her wasn't just a victim of poverty. He was a man carrying scars from a war he had never wanted to fight. And now, those scars threatened to reopen. The next day, Maria's precinct received shocking news. The two men rescued from the van had disappeared from the hospital. The officers guarding them had been found unconscious. Panic rippled through the department. Maria immediately thought of David's warning. That night, she found him pacing her apartment, his dog restless. "They're tying up loose ends," David said grimly. "And if you were seen near that van, you're next." Maria's blood ran cold. For the first time, she realized how much danger she was truly in. And the only man who understood that danger was the one society ignored. It wasn't long before danger came knocking literally. Late one night, a pounding shook Maria's door. "Police!" a voice barked. She instinctively reached for her gun, but David grabbed her wrist. "Wait," he whispered. His instincts told him something was wrong. Carefully, he peeked through the window. His breath caught. "That's not the police," he muttered. Men in dark suits waited outside, guns barely concealed under their jackets. Maria's heart pounded. They had come for her. David looked at her, eyes blazing with determination. "We need to get out. Now." Through the fire escape, they slipped into the alley. David's dog padded silently beside them, ears perked. Maria felt her pulse in her throat, each step echoing like thunder. Behind them, the men broke into the apartment, shouting orders. Gunshots rang out as glass shattered. Maria froze, but David pulled her forward. "Move!" he urged. They darted through the maze of alleys until they reached an abandoned warehouse. Both collapsed inside, gasping for breath. For Maria, the danger was real now. For David, it was a reminder of the world he had tried to escape and failed. In the cold darkness of the warehouse, Maria pressed her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. "Who are they?" she demanded. David's jaw tightened. "Mafia. The kind that owns half the city in shadows. I used to be their errand boy. I delivered things I didn't ask about, and when I tried to leave, they made sure I lost everything." His voice cracked with pain. Maria stared at him, shocked. She realized that the man society had abandoned was carrying secrets that might now save her life, or doom them both. For the first time, Maria felt powerless. She was a trained officer, but against this kind of enemy, her badge meant nothing. Yet when she looked at David, sitting there with his dog beside him, she felt a strange surge of hope. He had already saved her once. He had nothing, but he fought harder than men with everything to lose. "We need a plan," she whispered. David nodded. "Then we start by staying alive tonight. Tomorrow, We figure out how to hit back." His eyes darkened, filled with determination. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was ready to fight. As dawn broke, Maria and David moved cautiously through back streets. Every car passing made them flinch. Every shadow looked like a threat. They needed allies, but who could they trust? Maria suggested going to her captain, but David shook his head. "No, the mafia has roots everywhere. If you trust the wrong person, you're dead." Maria hated to admit it, but he was right. The city she had sworn to protect suddenly felt like enemy territory, and her only ally was a man society had dismissed as worthless, a man who might be the only reason she was still alive. They found temporary shelter in an old mechanic's garage, long abandoned. David scavenged for supplies while Maria kept watch. She couldn't shake the image of the man storming into her apartment. If David hadn't been there, she would have been dead. Her heart tightened. She owed him her life, yet he seemed so unconcerned about his own. When he returned with bottled water and stale crackers, he offered them without hesitation. "Eat," he said simply. Maria shook her head. "You need it more." David's lips curved into a faint smile. "I've survived worse. You need strength now." But that night, Maria dreamed of fire, the van exploding, the men in suits, David pulling her through smoke and chaos. She woke with a start, breathless, only to find David still awake, keeping watch. His dog lay curled at his feet, ears twitching at every sound. "Why aren't you sleeping?" she whispered. David shrugged. "Old habits. Out there, you sleep too long, you don't wake up." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes carried the weight of years of fear. Maria realized then that he had lived in survival mode for so long it was all he knew. By the third day in hiding, tension was unbearable. Maria paced restlessly while David mapped routes on scraps of paper. "We can't keep running," she said sharply. "We have to fight back." David met her eyes. "I know, but we need evidence, something that proves what they're doing. Otherwise, they'll keep coming, and we'll always be prey." His determination was contagious. Maria felt her fear turning into resolve. Together, they began forming a plan, one that would risk everything, but could expose the mafia once and for all. Maria returned briefly to the precinct, carefully avoiding suspicion. She accessed restricted files, her hands trembling as she downloaded evidence onto a flash drive. Surveillance photos, financial records, phone logs proved that the mafia's reach extended far deeper than anyone imagined. When she returned to the garage, David examined the files with a grim smile. "This is enough," he said. "With this, we can bring them down." For the first time in years, Maria saw hope in his eyes. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was justice, but hope came with danger. That night, the mafia closed in again. Their footsteps echoed through the garage before bullets shattered the silence. David shoved Maria behind cover, his dog barking furiously. Adrenaline surged as they fought their way out, narrowly escaping through a broken window. Maria's heart pounded as they ran into the night, clutching the flash drive like it was life itself. "They won't stop," David gasped. "Not until we end this." Maria's reply was firm, her eyes blazing with the same fire. "Then let's end it together." They fled to the only place safe enough for now, an old church on the edge of the city. The priest, an old friend of David's from years ago, offered them shelter without questions. In the candlelight, Maria watched David's face, illuminated in flickering glow. His features were worn, his hair messy, but his eyes carried a strength that drew her in. She wondered how a man with nothing could carry so much courage. and why she trusted him more than anyone she had ever worked with. Days passed in tense preparation. David taught Maria how to think like a survivor, how to spot ambushes, how to move unseen, how to listen for danger in silence. In return, Maria reminded him of the man he used to be brave, smart, and capable. They grew closer, not just as allies, but as two broken souls finding strength in each other. Every moment they shared built an unspoken bond, but neither dared to voice the question lingering between them. When this was over, what would they mean to each other? Their plan was simple but deadly. They would lure the mafia into a trap, leaking information that would force them into the open, then exposing them with undeniable evidence. Maria arranged for a hidden camera while David ensured escape routes were clear. "It's risky," Maria admitted. David smirked faintly. Everything worth doing island. On the night of the operation, both stood side by side in the shadows. Their nerves stretched thin. The city lights glimmered like distant stars, as if holding its breath for what was to come. The mafia arrived in black cars, confident and untouchable. Their leaders stepped out, flanked by armed men. Maria's pulse raced, but she kept her hand steady on the camera trigger. David stood beside her, eyes narrowed. "Now," he whispered. As the leader spoke, incriminating himself, Maria captured everything. But before they could escape, one of the guards spotted them. Shouts erupted, guns raised. Chaos exploded as David grabbed Maria's hand, pulling her into the storm. Bullets whizzed past, their escape hanging by a thread. They burst into the night, breathless, clutching the evidence that could finally destroy the mafia. Behind them, shouts echoed, but ahead lay the faint glow of safety and the hope of justice. As Maria and David collapsed into the shadows, their dog barking fiercely at their side, they knew the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, they weren't just running. They were striking back. Together, an officer and a homeless man, two unlikely allies, bound by fate, had become the city's last hope for truth.